Greetings, A2U2, Allen Ave UU friends, and wider world as well. This is Rev Tara from Allen Ave UU Church, minister at A2U2, and this is my today is June 24th, 2024, update on this past week of denominational excitement, we'll say. It has been a week of conferences and General Assembly for our Unitarian Universalist Association, as well as a climate, justice, and faith retreat that a number of us from A2U2 attended, and also an online conference dealing with LGBTQIA plus elders and queer aging. So all of that has been going on this past week since we last gathered together for our closing worship service of the program year. And before I head off for vacation and study leave for a few months, I wanted to spend some time sharing with you what unfolded this past week. So I'm going to start with Ministry Days. Ministry Days is the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association annual gathering, which happens every year, the first part of the week, right before General Assembly, GA, which happens the second part of the week. So Ministry Days is an opportunity for Unitarian Universalist ministers serving in parish ministry and chaplaincy and community organizing and all sorts of other ministries to get together and talk about what's going on in Unitarian Universalism from our perspective as clergy. And this year's theme was the future of ministry. We did not solve it. But what I can share from Ministry Days this year, these conversations about the future of ministry, is that through worship and discussion groups and conversation with our UUA president, Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt, we dove deep into the challenges of these times as well as the blessings of these times that we find ourselves in. And one of the most strong, overwhelmingly grounding feelings I left with was the deep sense that the patterns, the challenges, the questions that we as a community, we as Allen Ave UU are grappling with are exactly what almost all of my colleagues are grappling with in their congregations as well. So it's this deep reminder that we are not alone in this work, that there are large trends happening in the world of religion, in the world of justice, and we fall into those same patterns, right? Those questions about how do we do what we do sustainably? How do we engage families and embark on a truly multi-generational shared ministry? All of these questions about sustainability and the way things are changing and have changed, we are in good company, my friends. So that's Ministry Days. And then we moved into GA, General Assembly, the annual gathering and business meetings of our Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. So as you may know already, and I'll just give a little sort of brief update on how GA works, congregations, depending on their size, how many members they have a certain number of delegates that they're entitled to, and those delegates register to vote on behalf of their congregation in the business of the association. So this year, Allen Ave UU A2U2 had, I think we were entitled to 4 congregational delegates, not including staff. So we had 4 slots. Only one person was interested in serving as a delegate this year, so we gave up 3 of our votes. And the 3 folks that ended up engaging were myself and our DRE Emily and John Howard. So the 3 of us voted, and then our other 3 spots went unfilled. It was a hugely important year at General Assembly this year because it's the final year where we were voting on adopting, amending, and then adopting our new articulation of Article 2 of the UUA bylaws, which are the part of the bylaws that house our principles and purposes traditionally, historically. So I'll start with actually some of the other smaller business that went on. There were a couple of what we call acts of immediate witness. Those are proposals of justice issues that come out of the UU community that then the large community votes on to basically decide if we want to adopt those as an association as issues that we want to engage in the coming year. They usually come with action items or steps that congregations can take if they choose to engage in these issues. And it's a way to say as an association of congregations that these issues matter to us. So those acts of immediate witness that were proposed and passed this year included one about solidarity with Palestinians and with Palestine, one with regard to climate justice, one with regard to continued care in this COVID changed world. So continuing to center the needs of the marginalized, voices in conversations about masking and health and safety, folks who are disabled or immunocompromised. And then another one that calls for the release of the hostages from October 7th who have yet to be released. So all four of these acts of immediate witness were passed, overwhelmingly so, by the General Assembly, by those who gathered and who voted. There was also a business resolution this year that called for Unitarian Universalism to make explicit that our Association of Congregations supports as a theologically grounded way the lives and the flourishing and thriving of trans, non-binary, and intersex people. This is a radical stance to have a denomination take a stance on supporting a marginalized identity that is being overwhelmingly attacked legislatively right now. And I am excited to say that business resolution passed. 90% voted in favor and just 10% voted against. And not because that 10% of folks were not against supporting trans folks, but there were some concerns about language, and Unitarian Universalists love to fight and disagree about the way that we word things sometimes. And some people have asked about, why is supporting trans folks a business resolution? We as an association have long been supportive of the LGBTQ community. Oh, and I got the numbers wrong. It was a 92% affirmative vote. My colleague, Alex Capitan, articulated that a business resolution has more teeth in it than an act of immediate witness does. And he writes that this business resolution will help the highest levels of our denomination continue to take action in the public square for trans justice. And this resolution really names and affirms that the ability, these are Alex's words, the ability to live ever more authentically as one's true self is central to a lifelong journey towards spiritual fulfillment. So it names that supporting explicitly trans, non-binary, intersex, and gender diverse people is a foundational obligation revealed by Unitarian Universalist principles and values. So this is an expression of our faith, and it's huge to be a denomination, a religious denomination that has made a denominational commitment to support this work. So I am really pleased about how that went. And there was part of the discussion was really difficult and painful for folks. There was some arguing about the science behind gender affirming care and supporting gender diverse youth, and those are painful to hear. So it ended up in a good place. The big piece of work that we did as a General Assembly, as a gathered body, was to pass a couple of different amendments to Article 2 and not pass a few other ones. So the 6 core values with love at the center, that is the articulation of our values that we have been working toward for the last 3 years really, but 2 years of active study, and that were passed for another year of study last year at General Assembly. There was an amendment to add reason as an additional core value, and there was another amendment to add peace as an additional core value. Neither of those passed. I think that the gathered community, those delegates who voted, felt like both of those were actually adequately represented in other core values in the framework at large. Let's see, what else? So yeah, so then there was a couple of small wording things, but overall, the Article 2 framework, this statement of our values that are the foundation of our faith, did pass. So 80% of the gathered delegates voted in favor of the 6 core values with love at the center to replace the 7 principles and 6 purposes, and 20% voted against. So we are moving forward with the new articulation of Article 2. And I'm going to share my screen for a moment because there's a really neat graphic that can be helpful, and here it is. So here we see the 6 core values of interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice, with love at the center. And the thing that's really neat about this graphic and this way of focusing on values instead of principles is that these aren't a list. This is these values are meant to be, intended to be seen as interdependent, interlocking, and there's no order to them. They all impact each other. They're all overlapping. They all share commonalities, and love is that which centers this visual. And also we can just think about, one of the best ways I think we could possibly articulate our faith is that even across the broad religious, spiritual, theological diversity in our congregations and in our movement at large, love is truly at the center when we are being our best selves and when we're living up to our aspirations. So you will see, A2U2 folks, there's a bulletin board outside my office that has this visual really big. Actually, it's been up there for a year, but you maybe have walked by it and not really noticed. So I invite you to take a look next time you're in the building. We'll be spending a lot of time in the coming years starting to familiarize ourselves with this framework. And I also want to share some words from a colleague of mine, David Pyle. He writes really beautifully about the fact that, yes, we passed this new way of understanding, and yes, some people are using the terminology of like, we're getting rid of the principles and sources. And I want to invite us to consider that what's really happening is not that we're getting rid of anything. We did a long overdue overhaul of our bylaws. We're supposed to really go through those bylaws and shift them. Article 2 is meant to be studied and changed every 15 years. And it's been since the mid-'80s since we've done that. So it's long overdue. Because the world changes and we change and our faith changes. That being said, there are some of you for whom the principles and the sources resonate really strongly, and you might not really want to give them up. No one is asking you to give up the core of your faith or the way that you practice or understand things. Just in the way that, in a similar way to, we added many congregations. Our congregation didn't go through this process, or hasn't yet, but many added an 8th principle, and that was up to the congregation, and so it's the same with this, right? It doesn't mean we can never talk about the principles or the sources. It just means that as an association of congregations, the Association of Congregations has decided, with 80% support from member congregations, that the Unitarian Universalist movement more broadly is moving forward with a new set of values that we feel, that they feel, and I actually love the values really affirms who we are and who we want to be as an ever evolving, transforming faith. So anyway, David Pyle, this colleague of mine, he wrote a post about how he has never actually felt. He said, I'll quote him. I'll go ahead and quote him. I've never rested theologically comfortably within Unitarian Universalism, this faith tradition that I have dedicated much of my life to serving and sharing. I am grateful for that reality. He talks about how the scriptures and the sacred texts that are most important to him theologically are not central and have not been central to the congregations he has served as a minister or to the association, and that's been challenging for him at times. And he talks about how, again, the most important parts of his own faith are not that important to a lot of other Unitarian Universalists. And he says, but I'm okay with that. He says, by staying in the fabric of our UU faith community and by not requiring my religious tradition to reflect my own personal faith perfectly, I have learned and grown so much more than I ever would have if such a community that reflected my theology perfectly existed. He says, by remaining in this faith, I have grown in my understanding of my own faith and how it calls me to live in the world. So even if these values don't speak directly to you, even if you start to spend time working with them, thinking about them, imagining how you might do some theological and personal spiritual reflection with them, even if they don't resonate perfectly, I invite you to lean in and be curious and be open to the fact that they're not going to resonate perfectly with all of us, and that that's okay. That that's the point of our tradition, our living tradition, where we're constantly changing. He says, I'm going to quote him again, David Pyle. So he says, if the principles and sources remain sacred and important to you, then keep them so. If you need them in a governance document, then every congregation has a process to amend that congregation's bylaws. Put the principles and sources there. But they are just as much a reflection of who we are today as they were yesterday. And a new formulation of the purpose of the UUA only adds to who we are. It does not take anything away unless you let it. End quote. So as we embrace these new core values, although the values aren't new, it's a new articulation of our core values, you are invited to keep the principles and the sources as close to your heart as you would like. I think, from my perspective, and it's an exciting time in Unitarian Universalism. It's an exciting time to be in this shared ministry with you, and I'm grateful for Emily and for John for representing our congregation and voting. And I hope that perhaps next year more of you will get involved as well. GA next year will be in person and online. It'll be a hybrid GA taking place in Baltimore, Maryland. So those are the UUA business items. Now I want to tell you a little bit about a conference that I presented at this past week as well. This was a conference called LGBTQ Elders in an Ever-Changing World. And the presentation that I gave was called Beyond the Binary, Multi-Generational Conversations About Gender. So this was a presentation, a workshop that I co-facilitated with someone dear to me, that was about building skills to have intergenerational conversations about gender identity and gender expression. It was a really, really fascinating time. And I want to share that a lot of my interest in this topic has come from working with our congregation. I am, as you know, a genderqueer, non-binary millennial, and I'm your minister. And many of you are boomers or Gen Xers, and many of you hold LGBTQ identities. And together, we've been grappling for these last few years in big and small ways with what it means to expand our welcome to LGBTQ folks who are specifically gender nonconforming, use different pronouns than we may be used to, are trans or non-binary. And so those conversations have sparked my interest in this topic. And one of the senses that I really had in presenting this information and leading this group who signed up for the workshop through this process of thinking about building skills and tools for these kind of conversations is how countercultural it is to center care and curiosity and embrace really healthy, honest conversation. In a lot of ways, that's the thread that we have been following through our 2 years of transitional ministry together. And I hope that that thread continues into our shared developmental ministry starting in August. So I'm excited to possibly in some way, shape, or form, I'm not sure how yet, bring that workshop maybe in a little bit of a different form to A2U2 or our community more broadly. So if you're interested in talking about that, let's talk come August, and we'll see what we can do this coming year. The final of the 4 big events of this past week was a retreat that a team of 4 of us from A2U2 attended. This retreat was attended by me, as well as Angie and Patricia and Barb. We were a congregational team representing A2U2 at a retreat called Claiming Your Call, which is a retreat sponsored by the BTS Center that we applied and were accepted to. It was fully funded, 3 days at the Schoodic Institute on Schoodic Peninsula up in Acadia in Winter Harbor. And the work of this retreat was to invite teams from congregations across New England who are interested in climate justice work, and in particular, reflecting on what an emerging call might be in our congregation and how we want to engage in this work. So the BTS Center, the successor of Bangor Theological Seminary, is now a nonprofit organization that equips congregations to engage with climate justice from a faith-based perspective. They talk about catalyzing spiritual imagination and cultivating spiritual leadership for a climate-changed world. So over the course of these 3 days, we had conversations with Wabanaki elders on Indigenous science and Indigenous ways of relating to the land. We engaged in deep and powerful worship. We had conversations with climate scientists paired with theological reflection. We talked about creation and environmental justice. We engaged in spiritual practices that connected us with the earth and with the land. And we engaged in what we were calling cross-congregational discernment groups. So Allen Ave UU, A2U2, is in a larger group with teams from the United Church of Christ, UCC Church in West Tisbury, which is on Martha's Vineyard, with St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Brunswick, and with First Congregational Church, UCC, in South Portland. So this is our group of 4, our cross-congregational discernment group. And as we as congregations, so groups of 4 shared about our congregations and about the sense of call that we were feeling in ourselves and that we were feeling coming from our congregations, we shared with each other and we reflected back to one another what we were hearing, what we were sensing, what seemed like it was emerging. It was a really beautiful practice of group spiritual direction in a way. And it was a really powerful experience. One of the things that is coming out of this retreat are what's called a community of practice. So this group of 4 congregational teams is going to continue to meet and work together and reflect together over the next 6 months on what we're calling a small experiment with radical intent. So we will be imagining and thinking up in conversation and consultation with all of you some sort of small experiment we can take as a congregation to connect ourselves more deeply with the work of environmental and creation justice and with our land. As you all know much better than I do, A2U2 has a long history of environmental justice engagement. And I think that one of the things that's happened is over the years, there's been a deepening sense of call to engage beyond the work of what used to be kind of called a green team, right? So composting, recycling, talking about solar panels and heat pumps. I have sensed, and I know that my team, the A2U2 team that I was working with this past week, has sensed a deepening call that goes beyond the work of sort of surface level environmental justice, to really think about what it means to consider all life and all of nature as sacred, and to really lean into the interdependence of the web of life that we affirm in our seventh principle and now in our core value of interdependence. So we're going to be thinking this coming year about how we might engage in a small action, a small project experiment with radical intent to be curious and deepen our relationship with the sacred natural world. One of the things we were asked to do on the last day was to articulate what our radical intent is. Not necessarily our small experiment, because we need to talk with all of you about that, because this is a congregational thing. But we did articulate as a group of four what our radical intent is, and I want to share those words with you. Our radical intent as the team from A2U2 is to strengthen our sacred interconnections with all of our neighbors, human and other than human, across generations, in ways that expect and support our ongoing transformation. So that is some of the discernment we did together, and I am super excited to see where we go with all of this. And there is no rush, but a deepening connection in these times that are so fraught and so challenging, I think, is only going to be a good thing. So that is what happened, what unfolded this past week. In the email that was sent out to members and friends of A2U2, there are some links that may be helpful to you in learning more. And I encourage you to talk amongst yourselves, to go on the UUA website. There's all sorts of ways you can learn more and get more information about how all these decisions went down and what they all mean and what our implications are. But for now, I just want to leave you with a reminder that our shared faith is a shared faith, and it's an individual faith. We each carry our own understanding of what Unitarian Universalism means to us and how it functions in our lives. And so lean on your own faith, your own theological interpretations of all of this. Nobody wants to take those away from you. And by articulating a shared vision and a shared set of values, I think that we will be a stronger community, both as a congregation and as the UU world, the UU movement. It's an exciting time to be a Unitarian Universalist, and it is my deep joy to be one in partnership, in friendship, in community with each and every one of you. I'm so excited to rejoin this community in August after my vacation and study leave time and dig into the work that is ahead for us. Take care, my dear ones, and I'll see you in August.